welcome to the Knockout Zone, where boxing is the language that we speak.
The Knockout Zone.
Today, I want to talk about the boxers who have raised the banners of their countries. I know that the United States of America has always been the center of world boxing, but nonetheless, there are some athletes that have become synonymous with their countries and those that have lifted up the banners of their countries in a marvelous way. If you're not talking about boxing, for example, once you hear of people like Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Jimmy Cliff, Usain Bolt, the first thing that comes to mind is Jamaica. And the boxers have done the same thing. And staying with Jamaica, we've had a number of boxers coming out of that beautiful island. People like Mike McCollum, people like Razor Reddock, and people like Trevor Berbick. They have lifted up the banner of Jamaica to the entire world. And there are some other boxers staying with the Americas. If you think of Argentina, we've heard wonderful fighters like the champion Carlos Monzon and the world light heavyweight champion Victor Galindez. And what about Nicaragua? There's one man that stands out over there, Ricardo Mayorga. I know there could be many more, but nonetheless, those two have lifted up the banner of Argentina in a marvelous way. And coming to Panama, there's only one man that stands out, and he is known as the Hands of Stone, Roberto Duran. Some people wouldn't have known that there's a country called Panama if it wasn't for Roberto Duran. So we put our hands together for the Hands of Stone, of great fighters that come out of that country. But there are some fighters that stand out or that stood out in Mexico, like Julio Cesar Chavez, Pepino Cuevas, Salvador Sanchez, Oscar De La Hoya. And today we have Canelo Alvarez, the former world heavyweight champion Andy Ruiz, Manuel Marquez, and Antonio Barrera, just to mention a few. So all those fighters have lifted up the banner of Mexico in a marvelous way. Now let's go to Colombia in South America. There we had a man known as Kid Pambele, Antonio Cervantes. What about the beautiful island of Puerto Rico? You cannot speak about Puerto Rico without mentioning Felix, Tito, Trinidad, and Wilfredo Gomez. Those men have lifted up the banner of Puerto Rico in a marvelous way. Canada has produced a number of champions as well, starting way back from Tommy Benz and Arturo Gatti, just to mention a few. And when you think of the Philippines, only one man stands out over there. Manny Pacquiao. He is a strong representative of the Philippines, a great champion. And what about the U.S. Virgin Islands? You have Julian Jackson and you have Livingston Brumble. Those men have lifted up the flags of the islands in a marvelous way. Great fighters. Great champions. Now let's cross over to the east, China. We have a man called the Big Bang, Zilazong. He is an ambassador of the Chinese Republic. Now let's cross over to the continent of Africa. Let's start with Ghana. One man that stands out there is the former world champion Azuma Nelson. He lifted up the banner of Ghana so high during his time. And what about Uganda? Uganda, we have a great fighter, Ayub Kalule. He is the man that lifted up the flag of Uganda during his fighting times. And he was a great champion indeed. And what about South Africa? South Africa has produced a number of world champions. To mention some of them, starting way back with Jake Dooley, great British Empire flyweight champion. He stands as the icon in boxing South Africa. We had Baby Jake Matlala. We had Peter Terra Matebula. We had Gerrie Coetzee. We had Welcome Litter. And what about the Rose of Soweto, Dingaan Thobela? We had Pete Krause. We had Brian Mitchell, Corey Sanders. South Africa has produced a number of champions that lifted up the banner of the country. And going back to West Africa, we have Nigeria. Nigeria has produced great champions. And to mention a few that lifted up the banner of the country, we have Ike Ebubaki, we have Samuel Peter, and we have Ajagba. And what about DRC? One man stands out in that country, and his name is Martin Bakole. He represents DRC today. And let's go to England. England has also become the powerhouse of boxing. I don't even want to mention the heavyweight greats that come out of England. There are some wonderful, amazing middleweight champions that came out of that country. I'm talking about the GOAT, Chris Eubank Sr., and I'm talking about Nigel Benn. Great middleweight fighters came out of England. Now let's talk about Ukraine, the Klitschko brothers. And then you have Lomachenko. Even the current undisputed heavyweight champion today comes from Ukraine in the name of Alexander Usyk. They have lifted up the banner of that country. And what about Denmark? Brian Nelson is the man that has lifted up the banner of Denmark in the world of boxing. And what about Italy? Primo Carnera and Nino La Rocca. Those fighters coming out of Italy, they have made Italy known into the boxing world. And what about Russia? We have Dmitry Bivol, what a great champion he is. And we have Costa Taizu, great fighters coming out of that country. And finally, I want to talk about New Zealand. New Zealand fighters are amazing. New Zealand has produced wonderful heavyweight champions. Even currently, we have Joseph Parker. What an amazing fighter, what an amazing champion he is. And we had the great David Toll. What a fighter he was. Great champion. And this is not the first time New Zealand has ever produced a great fighter. Way back we had Bob Fitzsimmons coming out of that country. So all what I'm saying is, much as the United States of America has been the dominant force in the world of boxing, but there are some fighters who have proudly raised the banners of their countries and made a great representation in the world of boxing for their respective countries. So even though the United States has been the center of world boxing, but nonetheless, salute those champions.